Well, we're back here once again with Sunday Night AstroLive. And let me check my audio here. Hold on. That's so much better. There we go. I can take these out now too. All right. How the heck is everybody? Are we in the world? In the world at large? Let me get untangled here and free myself of the burden. These wires. Okay. Coming to you live from the 512 this evening. Ooh, what an interesting effect. Like phasing in and out of time or something. Time space. All right. Let's see. Who's in the house? Who's in the 11th house tonight? Shall we take a little roll call here? And what role are you playing? Susie G. What's going on, Susie G? Meow Meow. Meow Meow's here. Thor at the door, my man Steve. What's happening? Brandy Herrera. Texas heat was unlike anything I've ever felt. That's what all the ladies say. Let's see. Who else do we have here? Chemtrails piss me off more than I could ever even write. I know. And they're supposed to. I mean, just think about this for a second. If they wanted to, they could probably make invisible chemtrails, right? Clear chemtrails. They could, if they wanted to. I'm sure they could. And you wouldn't have to see them. But maybe there would be just enough of an isotope in them so that when they made the crosses and they wanted to use those crosses for target points for the HARP energy transmissions, they'd be able to see it on their Doppler, but you wouldn't have to see it, right? So you'd be running around thinking, oh, look, everything's just fine, no chemtrails. But no, they do that on purpose so they can fuck with you and gaslight you as you see the chalky marks across the sky with absolutely nothing you can do about it. That is all by design. And I'm with you 100%, Susie. Helium Heart Hosey, baking tonight while listening. Yes, it is baking here. Definitely. Road Trip 1981, what's going on? That's our dear friend Darlene. Leanne Ott, Texas Weather Report 102. And rising. Glennis Bank checking in from sunny South Carolina. Yes, says there she is, the lovely and talented one. Saving Austin one tooth at a time. She's here. DJ MC in the house. What's going on, brother Mike? Beth Cummings, waiting for the show, listening to everyone. Hi, Beth. Thanks for waiting around. There's my man, Tom. TJ. Secret Law 2007. And Rama Lama. Oh, we have a deer sighting in the yard tonight. How lovely. How lovely the deer sighting. No Jasper tonight. No Jasper tonight. Since I am in the 512 Soul Secret Service, glad you can make it. There she is, the Oklahoma Wildcat, Janice Phillips. She's here. Are we feeling that moon? I'm not feeling it so bad. That could change tomorrow. Yeah, you're an air sign. That moon could be good for you. A kooky aqua moon could be good for you. Let's see. Jack says, what's happening? Sadly, back in SoCal from Sardinia. Chicago fire, one of my favorite conspiracy theories. We're not going to get into the fire so much tonight, but we're gonna start some fire around Chicago itself for sure. I mean, come on, Mrs. O'Leary's cow. Give me a fucking break. Give me a break. User 13, you're on time. I wasn't. Congratulations. Barbara Boots. Let's see. Who else we have here? Cynthia Cluth. Hi, Cynthia. Deborah R. It took it slower than normal today to help the energy. Extended getting some chores done more easily than expected. Feel more tired these days. I think a lot of people are kind of getting worked over energetically. DJ Pebblestone, Humid World of Hell in New York. I think New York is borderline hell without the humidity. Never used to. Well, New York's gone through so many different cycles and phases. Talk about a city of resets. Atlantis Rising. Greetings. Greetings. There's Jolie Evans. Salutations from Aspen with Jolie. Hi, Claire. Welcome to the show. Good to see you. There's my man down the wombat hole from down under. Down under. WC Ray, my man Robin. What's going on, brother? Good to see you. Sun Tzu, new subscriber here. All right, Sun Tzu. Welcome to the crowd. There's my man Ryan. Yes, you can buy me a cup of coffee over there since I have been deplatformed on this channel, YouTube, since the 2010s. I was deplatformed before it was cool to be deplatformed. 5DRG, evening, right back. Yes, you can become a member over there at the locals. I've been putting some stuff up over there the last couple of days for your edification. We'll be doing another locals members only event as we do once a month in, I'd say probably about maybe 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Peter Bayonne. What's going on, brother? The world is getting. Did you guys hear the story about the guy who was piloting the plane? It's like one of those two-seater planes, like pilot, co-pilot dude. And he fucking gets up, goes out of the plane, and he walks out the back of the plane. Have you guys heard that story? Like, crazy. What is going on here? I don't think he had a parachute either. He's like, you know what? I think it's time. It's time to get off the ride. And I'm going to have a few moments to reflect upon my life before it is terminated. Wow, that's a story. Woke Ones Revolution. That is Heather Botkin, who is the lead revolutionary of the Woke Ones. Welcome, Heather. Sharon Lewis is here. Yes, please do hit the like. If you haven't subscribed, I'd like to hit 15,000 people by the time I get to the age of 70. That is a life goal for me. And you can make that happen. I do have a few years, but let's not wait. Ziggurats. What's going on, Ziggurats? Jill Wong checking in from Mexico. Hi, Jill. Here she is, the fantastic one, CC Jones. CC Jones. Scott A.M. What's going on, Scott? Misbehaving too. Yes, if you'd like to get an astrological reading, there's the coordinates. You can go on in there and get yourself a astrological reading with me, Robert Phoenix. L. Foxworth. Hello from the armpit of SC. Is that Southern California or South Carolina? I guess they can be both armpits, if you think about it. They're sort of located both in the armpit section of the country. Queen Lisa. Florida. Been watching a lot of podcasts from different channelers about the angelic realms are working hard to keep things in balance down here. I'm going to do a show one night where I'm just going to channel. I'm going to leave the astrology behind, and I'm just going to channel. I can channel, you know. I don't do it very often. And my clients have to pay extremely high rates to get the channel. So one of these nights. Yeah. Let's see. Matt Burns is here. Hi, Matt. Good to see you. Yes, I channel a very wise. You don't okay. I know that the occupation, but I know that the occupation is probably it's not that exalted, right? I channeled a janitor from Egypt. But the thing about this janitor is that he got to hear everything. He's like sweeping the broom and listening in on Pharaoh, right, or whoever they were. Yeah. So I channeled a janitor from Egypt, ancient Egypt, not current Egypt. That wouldn't be that interesting. But you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised how wise that janitor is. You cannot judge the channeled source by its cover. Bodhicitta, what's happening? Linda Light, delicious. Rand, hey, from Canada. Almost full moon rising. Mindy Beth, hey, Mindy Beth. Your son is listening, and he's a Gemini sun with a Sag moon. Cool. Haha, Mercury, stop it, Delco. Lynette Jardine, Mad Maxine, she's here. MB, what's happening, MB? Good to see you. You can violet flame it. Yes, I can. CR user. What's happening, CR? Out of Space Jam. Oh, the Rolling Stones rhythm section was fucking, I think who was the percussion player? Was it Bobby Keys? I think Bobby Keys might have been the percussion player. I think he was banging on the congas. Charlie Watts, Bill Wyman, Billy Preston. Too bad Billy Preston had all that like weird shit around him. It's always hard. It's always hard to go back and listen to people and go, yeah. Let's see. Veronica's Barn is here. What's going on, VB? Let's see. Derek Ravenwall is finishing work. Listen, see, my band is playing a mile from United Center on Friday. Hopefully, the chaos has taken its course. Oh, you got a band playing in Chicago there. Cool. Chicago, great music town. Man. Everything from rhythm and blues to Chicago house to Smashing Pumpkins. I mean, people think of music, they'll say, oh man, New York, great, or Detroit, right, or LA, or San Francisco. Man, you cannot, Chicago's got to be up there. It's got to be up there in terms of music. Really, really amazing artists from Chicago. Gaia Dance, what's happening? Welcome to the Sunday night show. Mercury really messing with Newtown Square here. Mercury's been interesting in this retrograde. What's going on, Bo? Good to see everyone's favorite wine mom is mine. She's fucking smashed half the time, maybe 3/4 of the time. Jesus, she's slurring her words. You know that Kamala hits the sauce. She totally hits the sauce. Civitu de Pay. Hey. Evan Taylor, what's going on, Evan? Good to see you. Jolie has a job interview tomorrow with the city of Aspen. All right, let's send her some good vibes. Let's send her some good vibes. Good vibes, Jolie. Kelly B, what's going on? LMM. Joe Licky, yes, please hit the like and subscribe. Thank you, Joe. Always appreciate that. New York is fun as fuck. Party all the time. Man, New York back in the day, for me, like the late 90s, early 2000s, anything from like 94 to 2001. Double thumbs up. Julian Hartwell, the full sturgeon moon is just beginning to rise. Big and beautiful here in Philly. Sun Trekker Thompson checking in from Rhode Island. Love Rhode Island. I'm a big Providence guy. I like them all them Italian delis. Jimmers, 333. What's happening? Who else do we have here? Gerard Crawford. What's the crake? What's the crake? We got some good crake here. This is the crake house. Let's see. Olivia. I've been trying to sign up for locals for 2 weeks now. I don't know why. I don't have an answer for you there, Olivia. I'm not sure what's up. Gucci the Goats. Hello, Jake. Good to see you. BK is checking in from the Treasure Coast. Who'd like to live on the Treasure Coast? I'd like to live on the Treasure Coast. It sounds like fun. Life is fun on the Treasure Coast. We have Pirate Week on the Treasure Coast. That happened a while ago near Raleigh, North Carolina. That's just weird. Mike, would you mind taking the wheel for a minute? I have to step out. Mike, yeah, sure, no problem. What? Let's see. Who else do we have? Tondar, if I have to hear that Taylor Swift story one more time, so help me, I'm jumping out of this plane. Let's see. Sun Tzu, thank you everyone for the welcome. I've been listening a lot lately. I'm between two worlds, Palm Desert, California, Hill Country, Texas. I like that Palm area. There's lots of things out there. Let's see, who else do we have? I should have 50K. I don't know what I should have, but I'm just grateful for what I do have. This has been a life lesson that I have become tempered by over the years. Ryan says, yes, check out my early morning show, The Astro Weather. We got a lot of Astro cats in there, a lot of fun. It's a good way to start your day or end it, depending upon where you are. Lisa Ann White's here. The Law is in the house. Who else do we have? And don't forget 15 Minutes of Flame, where I breathe fire a couple days a week. Let's see. L. Foxworth, South Carolina. I don't trust channels. Well, you know, how could you not trust an ancient Egyptian custodian? Let's see. Who else do we have here? Rand from Canada, Charlottetown, PEI. What's going on, Rand? Welcome to the show. Psychic as heck, Robert. You are. Well, I have my moments. Harry Bowie. Hey. We got Jig in the house. Lena Winkler. A lot of new names. It's really cool to see new names here. That's right. Janitors know all the dirt. I'm going to throw that right up. You bet that. You got that right. They know all the dirt. Green-eyed Crow. Janice Janitor. Do not ever underestimate. You just think the janitors are the lowest of the low. Oh, no. They are not. They have a secret society that you don't even know about. They're just posing as janitors. You think janitors are just, you know, guys that push the brooms, change the toilet paper, clean the inside of the toilet, right? Oh, no. They wield more power. More power. That's right. They're the brotherhood of the ring, the toilet ring. BOTR. Let's see. What else we have here? All here, the channeler. Jillian, that's great. I love it. Oh, the channeler. Oh, that's so funny. We're gonna have a good time tonight. We should like a janitor for president. Isn't that the truth? Wouldn't it be funny if there was some guy who was? I mean, that's kind of like being there with Peter Sellers, and they have this janitor who somebody just randomly interviews. He works in Washington D.C. and he just starts like spewing like common sense, and they keep coming back to him and coming back to him, and then all of a sudden this janitor becomes incredibly popular, and it's kind of like network. And all the networks now are rushing to this janitor because the janitor is getting more screen time than some of the candidates. That would be a pretty cool story. It'd be kind of a takeoff on being there. This is the janitorial version of Sunday Night AstroLive. Ancient Egyptians, those types of guys, absolutely. The ancient janitors know their shit. Let me tell you, they know their shit. Let's see. Maya Rose is here. Hi, Maya. Oh, Bobby Keys is a sax player. That's right. Who's the guy that plays? You're right. Bobby Keys plays sax. Who was the guy that played the percussion with the Stones? If you watch Rock and Roll Circus when they're in Germany, it's that guy. It's that guy. It's that percussion guy. Thank you. But we've been known to play some. Yes, okay. It's that guy, whoever that guy is. Let's see. Who else do we have? Misty. Hi, Misty. I like Misty's icon. I like that icon. That's a cool icon. What do you call it? Thumbnail. I like Misty's thumbnail. Kamala totally. Yes. Can you blame her? She's really in the hot seat. She's gonna need more. She's gonna need more than wine to get through this. She's gonna need some of those good Joe Biden drugs. Providence is a cool town. I like Providence. Let's see. Got a bad tooth. You should come to Austin and let Joan take care of you. Curtis Moonfly, what's up, brother? Good to see you. Always good to have another muso in the house. New York in the 2000s, the best out fun. Yeah. Those were good times. I remember going to Williamsburg before it blew up. It was very cool. Oh, look at this. Weird. The pilot that jumped, the last name is Crooks. That is really weird. That is really weird. Very strange. That's getting stranger. Stranger and stranger. Barbara says, I trust channels more than I do the mainstream media. Well, when it comes to the mainstream media, I just change the channel. Let's see. Who else? Oh, Catherine Rosen is here. Hi, Catherine. Good to see you. Janitors keep the aliens under wrap. They're on the front lines. Janitors are highly evolved. Don't people just put janitors at the bottom of the hierarchy? Oh, no, 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 no. They are not. They are not. Just you get it. Let's see. Who else do we have here? Plumber Joe. Carol Morris, she's back. Busy summer. Welcome back, Carol. Look at that. 5DRG. I am a janitor. Look at that. Woo. There you go. There you go, bro. Right there. Michelle Renee just got back from Chicago. Oh. So far, so good. Just more traffic, and it's surreal. The number of U.S. flags at the airport, like they care about America. I'll be there in September. I hope it's still there. There's a few things I would like to enjoy. Let's see. Did I say hi to Meow Meow? Geometric sphere, universal intelligence. Charlie Watts on the drums. That's right. Hey, look who's here. We got an Emily Moore sighting. What's going on, E? Good to see you. Let's see, Lana Labonte. Lana, hey, Labonte. What's going on, Lana? All right, we got Liddy Lou. We got Liddy Lou side in as well. Alain Delon. Oh, yeah. He was cool, man. Alain Delon was cool. He was a cool cat. Cool Frenchman. All right. Are we all caught up? Celeste Loveheart. Hi, Celeste. Maurice Ham. Good evening on this blue moon. Good evening back. Let's see. I think we're all caught up. I think Brody, who's here, is supposed to be here, and who isn't supposed to be here might be here, and will be here at some point in time. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about tonight's show and where we're going to go. So the genesis of tonight's show starts on Friday's show. If you haven't seen Friday's show, we had Jock Doubleday on, whom I really, really liked. And Jock's story is that he's a playwright, and he went to Bosnia for 14 years and was there at the Bosnian pyramid, and he was working with, I'm sorry, I forget the fellow's name, who's sort of the guy who's, and I even had him on my show, I think back in 2014. So he worked with him for 14 years, spent a lot of time like on, in, around the pyramid there in Bosnia. And so he started to notice things that were on the other side of the pyramid, which looks like a mountain, but clearly is also very pyramidal. And he started to see some things that got his attention. And he was noticing these almost like they were chunks that were almost pre-made chunks and then seamed up together, which was very interesting. So he noted that, and eventually he matriculates to Texas. And I caught up with Jock maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, and he did a video on Enchanted Rock, and I thought it was quite interesting. And then he's been here since then, and his channel kind of went like gray for a little bit. And then he started to do more stuff, and he started to do these videos where he's in these creek beds and riverbeds in Texas and noticing the exact same sort of, what would it be, like is it like a 40-degree angle, I believe? It's not a hard 45-degree angle. So it's like if we were talking astrology, it'd be like a sextile. So he'd be seeing these sextile lines kind of running through all these different layers, right? Really from the bottom of like the creek bed and up through this layered rock, and then all the way up through to the top. And he would see this again and again and again. And not only that, but he also noticed that there were these kind of layers of striation between like this one area of like really hard granite, and then below that, like layered areas of silica. So he has been developing this theory along the lines of some other people that that this was a created realm, and like, and who were the creators and how did they do it? So, you know, he's working on this book and formulating this book based on these things that he's finding out there in the world. So we had a really good discussion, and we started to talk about ether, right? And then how I think that ether, or aether, however you say it, I think it plays a role, really significant role. And so we started to go back and forth, and like, what is it? You know, how is it? What is it comprised of? And so I asked him a question. You think ether is the byproduct of all 4 elements combined? And he thought about it, and he didn't have a solid answer for it. And I don't either, but it would make sense that it would be a combination of all four elements combined to make one element. And I have a theory about that, but that's not what this show's about. So then he brought up Tesla, or Tesla, if you want to say his name that way. And Tesla had a quote. He said that he had the technology to create a world in a day. Like, that's really powerful, right? That's really, really powerful to think along those lines. And I started to think, okay, well, let's think about Tesla a little bit, and what kind of energy might be involved with, like, Tesla technology. So, of course, my head went to scalar technology, scalar waves. And then I think I was talking with Johnny Cruz, and we were talking about Ohm. Right. So you have this guy who's German, his name is Ohm, and there's this, like, Ohm scale that is developed. And basically how Ohm works is like 0 ohm represents kind of this neutral zero energy readout on the meter. And as electricity / energy begins to get resistance, it begins to be registered on the ohm meter, right? So there's theoretically no electricity or energy until it's registered on the ohm meter. Well, there is a spectra of energy that goes in the opposite direction before it gets to 0 or 0.1, whatever the readout is on the ohm meter, right? It's just our way of physically measuring energy or electricity, because there's a whole spectrum that is not measurable in that way. So they said, okay, well, this is where it's going to start, right? And this is where it peaks and goes into the other sort of downward curve of the ohm meter, if you've ever seen one. And I looked it up, and it's like, well, when did they finally settle on this definition of ohm? And it is the year 1893. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That is the year of the Columbian Exposition. And I'm like, what else went on in 1893? A lot. What was the astrology like in 1893? Oh, wait till you see it. And where did it take place? Chicago. Interesting. What do we have taking place tomorrow? Democratic National Convention. Where? Chicago. In 1968, there was a landmark convention, one that was marked by extreme violence on the outside of the convention and extreme tension on the inside of the convention. That took place also in Chicago. And the city of Chicago has an astrological chart. And of course, who's going to be the centerpiece emerging out of the clamshell as if she was the wine drinking Aphrodite? Kamala Harris. So tonight's show is going to be all about that. Okay, we're going to go through all those different iterations, combinations, variations of Chicago. And I'm really looking forward to it. And so some of you folks out there in the Windy City, I hope you enjoy the show. And if you have any comments in the chat, well, you may want to bring them up. So why don't we do this? why don't we just take a quick look at the Columbia Exposition. If you haven't seen it before, it is the hold on a second. It is called the Columbian, the world's Columbian Exposition. And it started on May 5th in 1893. And it went to October 31st. So 6 months. I'm sorry, October 31st, 1894. So it went for a year and a half. Why don't we take a few, take a look at some pictures of the World's Fair. If you haven't seen them, they're kind of mind-blowing. Let's go look at this. Let's see. I'm just trying to get some good pictures. Now, there is some debate as to whether or not the Columbia World's Fair, also known as the Chicago World's Fair, was indeed a temporary exhibition. It seems like an incredible undertaking for a relatively brief period of time. And if you look at this, there's actually a very sophisticated canal system that existed through the heart of this World's Fair. And no, I don't want this. Okay. And one of the things that I've learned to pay attention to with pictures that are like this. Now, again, you have to use some discernment, right? But one of the things that I've learned to pay attention to is that, first of all, this is probably a photo that was painted over, right? But the other thing is that, and you'll see this on some of the other photos, is that you'll see a lot of weathering on the building. Let me do this. Let me get out of here. Let's get into the Wikipedia, the Google pictures, because a lot of them are undoctored. We want the raw cut. I mean, I love looking at pictures of this World's Fair because of just how incredibly elegant and advanced everything is and is laid out. I mean, look at some of these photos. Look at that. This is spectacular, right? So let's just think about this now. They built this so that they could tear it down. Let's look at this. They built this so they could tear it down after a year and a half. Again, let's just take a little bit of a look at the buildings themselves. Looking a little weathered, right? These do not look like buildings that were erected and then were slated to be demolished after merely a year and a half. Look at the detail work. You have these stags. You have this incredible boat. It looks like Odysseus, right? It's like the the heroes from the Iliad and the Odyssey, and you have these horses and these incredible fountains. I mean, look at this. At the center, there's this enormous obelisk, and look at the detail work here. Some of this might be Soldier Field. Some of this either got turned into Wrigley or Soldier Field. Like supposedly that's where it was, right? And they have all these construction photos, right? But is it really construction photos? Or are we just seeing scaffolding? Okay, let's go back over here. I mean, this is a really absolutely astounding and remarkable piece of achievement. Look at this. Way up here. And you're seeing part of what we saw from below, right? That's that fountain area over here. And these are all pavilions. This is where the babies show up in incubators, right? Here's a color painting rendition of said World's Fair. Oh, look at that. It's lit up. 1893, and it is alight. Right? And here's another view of the Columbian Exposition. And what's interesting is the word exposition. It's not exhibition, but exposition. They're showing you. That's what the word exposition means. They're exposing them to whatever it is that they want to expose them to. Look at this. It's incredible. That's Sheboygan County. Research historical. The Ferris wheels supposedly had a bit of a different function than becoming rides. Look at this. This is incredible. Absolutely remarkable, incredible. Here it is again. This is at night. 1893. I mean, this is almost a pinnacle moment. Look at this. Look at how ornate this is. There's that obelisk sitting right in the center. Right there. Now, here's the Ferris wheel with these human cars, the human cargo in the Ferris wheel. So I think that this is a really important moment in time for the pivot to the new world. Like my unfiltered take on all this, and perhaps it's due to the fact that at heart I am a bit of a romantic, but this is a model of another time, another civilization, another group of people who were here. And if you've watched John Levi's work, who inspired me to go and have my own exploration with this whole idea of Tartaria, none of this makes a lot of sense based on the population, the amount of money that was available to throw at these things. And this wasn't the only World's Fair, right? It's not the only World's Fair. There are plenty of others course, San Francisco had their own version of it. Buffalo had, they're all over the place. I mean, look at this. Lights, look at the splendor, look at the grandeur, and they're going to tear it down and they're going to live with whatever comes next. What is that? It's not this, I can tell you that right now. They also have the incubators at the Chicago World's Fair, or the Columbian Exposition. And they had cultures from all over the world that would show up there. So one of the things that is a theory for this time is that these World's Fairs, oh yeah, you got is that a stuffed mastodon? But these World's Fairs were essentially, how would I say, like learning centers. Like you could go there and get kind of an intense indoctrination into not just the world to come, but other cultures from around the world, which played a huge role in this exposition, right? So it's a pretty remarkable demonstration of something that, for all intents and purposes, should never have really existed. There's no financial reward in creating this, based on the fact that if you look at the money they theoretically spent on it, there's no way they would have ever made it back. Corporate sponsorships were really not that big at that time. People were on a relatively meager budget, and it wasn't like they were going to throw down, $200 for Chicago Exposition swag. They probably didn't even have swag. So this is I guarantee you, this is going to be a money-losing proposition. Well, there's those moose. So why would they do something like this? Why would they theoretically create a money-losing proposition? See, you get to meet with all kinds of people from all over the world. They're all there. And one of the things that I'll show you, or at least when we get into this a little bit, about who shows up there, some very fascinating people. So I think that this is a way for people to become indoctrinated. Think of like a giant hands-on learning center. Look at this. And not just for what's going on here, but also from other parts of the world. Look at this obelisk. Look at this. Look at the grandeur of this. And they're just going to tear this down. That's it. Just a limited hang. That's all there is to it. Just a limited hang. Nothing more than that. For me, this is also the, and when we get into the astrology, you'll see this. This is the end of that old world, right? This is the end of that old world. They'll take what they have from this old world, and then they will begin to apply it to the new world. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at the year 1893, and then we're going to get into the astrology of the opening of this, the Columbian Exposition. They're exposing, right, of 1893. So we are going to get into the astrology here. Just hang on to your spurs. So 1893 is a very interesting year. So over in UK, the Labour Party has its first meeting. I guess if you're a time traveler, you may want to go back and scuttle that. So we're about 40 years out of the Great Migrations of 1849, 1850, which we've talked about on the show here. Okay, where do we really want to go? Let's start. So this is a really important year. Thomas Edison, on February 1st, which is, of course, Aquarian, finishes construction of the first motion picture studio in West Orange. Now, at a certain point in time, the rumor has it that someone borrows Edison's camera and takes it to California in a place called Hollywood, where they begin to create their own motion picture industry. February 23rd, Rudolph Diesel. Now you're going to see, and keep in mind, there's a lot of transportation stuff going on in 1893. Look at this, the SS Naronic sinks without a trace in heavy seas on the Liverpool transatlantic passage, like without a trace. So Rudolph Diesel receives a patent for the diesel engine. The first battleship is launched by the United States Navy, the USS Indiana. So Liverpool is back in the news here, where the overhead railway opens with two-car electric multiple units, the first to operate in the world. The Ivory Coast has the great fortune of becoming a French colony on March 10th. Here we go. Look at this. 1893, April 6th. The Salt Lake Temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is dedicated after 40 years of construction. You may want to check that with Mr. Levi, because there's very scant evidence that they actually built that in 40 years. John's got the receipts on it. I also think it's interesting that if they were going to consecrate that church, right, or dedicate it, it's April 6th. It's an Aries day, and it is a religion that is dominated by men. Am I right? I think I'm pretty right. Pretty right about that. Okay, so you got the first recorded college basketball game. All right. Let's see, we got a sorority happening. Here we go. May 1st, 1893. Opens to the public. Now, May 3rd is usually considered the first day. So when you see the charts, you'll see May 3rd on the chart. The Free Presbyterian Church. All you Free Presbyterians out there, that's when your church was founded. We have a crash of the New York Stock Exchange, and guess what? It starts a bit of a depression. Gandhi's around, alive and kicking. He's in South Africa, working on his non-violent protest techniques. The Anti-Saloon League is incorporated. So they're starting to get into prohibition. Right? The whole prohibition talk is happening then. Let's see. Lizzie Borden acquitted. What else do we have here? Oh, this is important. Okay, so we have the diesel, which is patented. The first driver's licenses happened in 1893. The first driver's licenses. Right? Right there. Under the Paris Police Ordinance. Okay, just remember that. Diesel driver's licenses. Now, on 9/11, this is fascinating. 9/11, the World Parliament of Religions opens as an adjunct to the world's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Bengali Hindu monk Swami Vivekananda receives a standing ovation for his address in response to his welcoming. So I think it's really fascinating that they're starting to even so here's what I think. I think this 1893 World's Fair is a form of like machine learning. So if you guys know what machine learning, if you don't know what machine learning is, I'll share it with you. So machine learning is, let's say, this is the most famous version of machine learning. So they had a program that was supposed to just work for like determining like what type of person would be at risk in terms of like actuarial tables with insurance. So what they did is instead of just giving the program a narrow bandwidth of actuarial tables, that they started to flood, right, the program with a lot of tangential information, right? So that's called machine learning. And so they would find that these programs were able to crunch the data in ways that they were not expecting. So this actuarial program started to spit out like exact days when it thought people were going to die. Like that's really not what they wanted the program to do. So it was doing all these tangential things that it's like, okay, that's a little too broad, right? But that's how machine learning operates, right? That's how it works. You flood we'll call it an AI for lack of, you flood the AI with a large number of tangential information, and instead of just learning this kind of binary response to queries and answers, it has a much broader scope of interpretation for information. That's what I think. Okay, so first of all, we're all in machine learning now, right? We are in the midst of one of the greatest machine learning projects of all time. Like, how many of you listen to like a variety of podcasts on a more than frequent basis, including whatever it is that you're reading, right? And then what happens when you are the recipient of all of this eclectic and variant information? Inevitably, you're able to make connections between obtuse objects or obtuse narratives, right? Because there's something that connects one thing to another, but you wouldn't be able to necessarily know that or understand that if you didn't have all this tangential information that was part of, for lack of a better term, a machine learning process. So we're all in it right now. We're all crunching massive amounts of data constantly. And the idea is that it would allow us to have more complex and novel pathways of processing information than if we were just to go down one path and be very monospecific. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, some people are very good at it, and that's what they need to do. They just need to be very kind of, monolithic in terms of their approach. But a lot of other people are incredibly stimulated by this time, even though this time isn't always all that. I would say it's interesting, but it's not all that inspirational. And yet we're taking in all this very diverse information. And I don't think it's necessarily making us machines. That's not my contention. My contention is that we are at a point where the ability to handle massive amounts of information and even divergent programs, which most people can't handle. Most people can't handle two things that can be equally true at the same time. They have to pick one or the other, which is kind of understandable because there's always got to be a good guy or a bad guy. I get that, right? And in some cases, it's a lot easier when it's just black and white, night and day. But if you take Pluto and Aquarius into account, which is where we are, or we're retrograding, we have a brief stop with Capricorn, but that's where we're headed. To me, that represents the apotheosis of this idea of machine learning. Think about, just for you right now, think about where you were, say, 4 years ago, and where you are now, and where your head and your mindset was at 4 years ago, and the things you knew 4 years ago that you thought were true, and maybe still somewhat true, but not as true as you thought they were 4 years ago, and the things that you've learned along the way that you would never have thought about 4 years ago. And that was 4 years ago. Go back to 2016, that's 4 years before that, right? So what I'm saying is that because of everything that's coming at us all the time, we are in this place where we're mutating, right? We are mutating to be able to process high levels of information very quickly from very diverse sources. And well, some people will say, well, what good does that do? Well, I think we're going to need it, right? So I think you're either unplugged from the system and you're out in nature, whatever passes for nature now, and you are in the rhythm of nature, which is a beautiful thing. There's nothing wrong with that, right? And there's the rhythm of nature, and that has its own sort of timeless and eternal codec, okay? Or you're more in this world that we're in now, and maybe you can slip out to nature and get a little dose of that every now and then. But you're in this world now, right? And so this world is coming at us from all these different angles. So for me, I've always dug it. Like I've always felt like I am just a transceiver for all of these different cultural inputs. And now I see what's going on, that we're all becoming transceivers. And so the idea is that you begin to make more complex associations with information, and you can derive things out of that information that might be helpful. Or you may just have a lot of information that you may not know what to do with. But I think that there's a plan here. I think there's some kind of overarching plan, because when Uranus goes into Gemini and Pluto is in Aquarius, things are going to, and all at the early degrees, things are going to happen so fast, like it'll make your head spin how fast these changes are going to occur. Some of them will be interesting and perhaps good and benevolent, and some won't be. But I guarantee you the changes are going to come, and they're going to come very quickly. So I believe that there has been this system which has perhaps intentional and perhaps unintentional, that is getting us up to speed so that we can hit that Uranus-Pluto trine running. Because if you don't hit it running, like there's some surfers out there. Ryan's a surfer. He'll tell you all about this. You have to approximate the speed of the wave to get the wave. That's how you catch a wave. Right? If you're too slow, the wave goes over you. Right? If you're too fast, it might curl. Hey, you got to hit the wave. You have to approximate the speed of the wave. Well, the wave is coming. It's an information wave. And so what we're doing here is we'll call it hyper learning. I don't like the word machine learning. Hyper learning, hyper novel, and we're figuring out how to take all of this in, make sense of it, still stay sane, right, and process at a high level. And I know it sounds a lot like a computer, and I'm sorry if it sounds like that, but we're going to need that. Now, this World's Fair, to me, is a version of that. You dump a bunch of people. I mean, these are, who knows where they come from, right? Some of them may come from the area that's there or from around there. Some of them might be, like, I don't know, first generation, new people that have settled there. Remember, the first wave of mass immigration starts in 1848, 1849. This is less than 50 years later. So this could be the second generation of first wave. I would call it first wave migration, the Great Migrations. Or you just might be somebody new just showing up, right? So, and now you're in this place where you're being hit with all these different things simultaneously. So think of this exposition as a physical sensorium. Now, there are stories where there are things happening that are in Chicago itself that aren't necessarily associated with the World's Fair. And some of those stories are wild, like really, really wild, and quite debauched. Lots of drinking, like lots of beer guzzling and food and exotic dancers. Like, it's kind of crazy. Like, in Chicago itself proper. But then they have all these World's Fairs that are going on, and they all wind up kind of showing up kind of around the same time, and then they all catch fire, or a lot of them catch fire, and they're destroyed. And the splendor and the grandeur and the spectacle and the beauty of this kind of Greco-Roman sort of world just disappears. And then out of that, we have the beginnings of sort of, Bauhaus and form follows function, and, not real interesting. Let's keep going with this. There's some interesting stuff here. Okay. Oh, here we go. September 16th, 1893. You get your land run in Oklahoma. Janice Phillips. That's for you. New Zealand becomes the first country in the world to grant women's suffrage. Swami Vivekananda delivers the first inspiring paper at the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago. On September 21st, brothers Charles and Frank Duryea drive the first gasoline-powered motor car in America on public roads. Okay, so we have the patent of the diesel, we have the first license, and the first motor car. Remember that. The Baha'i faith is first publicly mentioned in the United States at the World Parliament of Religions. Okay, do you think now that we'll call them the social engineers? The social engineers are attempting at this time to create a world religion. I could easily see that. If you have a number of people who seem to be, let's say, quite green, and you wanted to, now remember, this is what, this is 24 years away from World War One. Actually, World War One starts, 1913. We go into World War. I think World War One started in 1911. So even before that, right? So this is 11 and 7, 18. It's about 18 years before. Now, if you look at World War One, World War One was supposed to be the war that would be the war that would end all wars, and they would create the League of Nations, and it was going to be the beginnings of a global government. And one of the things that was going to come out of that was they were going to have a world savior, right? They needed somebody to become the world savior, a figurehead, a religious figurehead for this new world order and a new world religion. So the Theosophists had found Krishnamurti and his brother. And Krishnamurti was the older of the two. And one of them was going to be the spiritual figurehead from the Theosophist side. Maybe not from these guys, right? But you could kind of see, like, okay, if we're going to create a new world, and if we believe that wars are planned in advance, that they were going to have a world war in 1911, right? They were going to have a world war. Then they would also be planning for something like the League of Nations, which would later become NATO/UN. It was never signed. The League of Nations was never signed. Woodrow Wilson never signed it, right? So, I mean, he may have fucked up with a bunch of other stuff, but he never signed the League of Nations proclamation. But that's where this was headed. So if you're at these World's Fairs and you know that this potentially new religion is coming because there's a war coming, and this war would be the thing that would redistribute land, power, title, and this idea that we couldn't get any more wars and we needed one spiritual figure to watch over the world, right? This would be a really good place to start, because you would open people up to these ideas. You would open them up to Vivekananda. You would open them up to Baha'i. Okay, let's keep going. So now we have the first card number license plate. So you have the diesel's patented, the first driver's license, the actual first running of a diesel-powered car in the United States, and now you got the first license. Wrapped up, ready to go, 1893. Okay. The Happy Birthday to You song is created in 1893. Bet you didn't know that. Let's see. So October 30th. I thought it went to 1894. So it closes in 1893. It's only 6 months. Interesting. I think it might have gone on in parts until 1894. November 7th, Colorado grants women the right to vote. We have I believe, the final of the Sherlock Holmes books written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Dvorak's Symphony No. 9. And then all you Evergreen Park, Illinois people, that's when your town was incorporated. Now, this is also what's quite interesting. Pepsi is founded in 1893. Very interesting. Coke predates Pepsi by about 7 years. And then you have the first colored high school, which is in Houston. You also have the first West Texas Military Academy, TMI Episcopal, happening right at the same time. I thought this was weird. 8,000 Chinese arrive in Cuba. Like, just think about that for a moment. For the Chinese to get to Cuba, they have to come all the way across the Pacific, and then they have to go all the way around the Horn, and then they have to come up, unless they go from train from California to the East Coast, and then somehow find their way down the Florida seaboard, jump on a boat, and then that's kind of mind-blowing. 8,000 Chinese. So what I'm really interested in about all this is this World's Fair and some of these things that are related to driving. Okay, and I'll show you why. So let me bring up this chart for the World's Fair, and I'll show you what I think is going on. Okay, let's make this a little bit bigger. So one of the things that you'll notice with these charts with Chicago is that almost every single one of them looks like a bucket or a modified bucket chart. In this case, we got a bit of a seesaw. But there's almost always one area that is incredibly clustered with these charts tonight, which you'll see. Now, check this out. We know that Pluto is this outer planet that defines a period of time, often vis-a-vis a generation, right? So all you Pluto and Leo people out there, more than likely, you're boomers, right? Little gap starting around 1957, 58, where it's like a lot less boomerish, right? And that gets up to about 1966, 67, when Gen X starts to kick in. So there's always these kind of gray areas a little bit. So it's not always set just by Pluto. There can be some overlapping years, right? But we do know that Pluto does define, for the majority of its time, the energy and the identity of not just a generation of people, but the time itself. Okay. So Pluto, this is where Pluto is. It's in Gemini. Okay. And what else is in Gemini? Neptune. There was a Neptune-Pluto conjunction at this time. And I'm thinking, this is really nuts. Right? It's really, really nuts, because we're talking about two worlds. We're talking about this world that this exposition is literally show and telling, right? It's like it's there, and they're using, and there may have been some construction or some refurbing, right? But they're using this incredible, and it's not just that fair. There's all these other fairs, but they're using them. Remember, exposition is the key word, right? And Columbia is the deity. Like, Columbia is the deity. So they're using this exposition as a number of different things, because we know that Gemini is kind of multiform. So it is a testament to this past, right? Like, okay, let's do this up, and let's fill it with all these current things from all around the world, whether they were there. Like, they would have Aborigines from Australia, pygmies from Central Africa. They had Hindu snake charmers. I mean, it's all there, right? Elephants, the whole nine. So they bring all that in for an intense 6-month period, and people have their own version of like machine learning. Like they are now telling them that this is the shape of the world, this is the history of the world, these are the continents of the world, these are the people that come from the continents of this world, right? Literally, that's what they're doing. And if whether or not that's true or not, or how they're being portrayed as true, is something completely separate. But that's what they're doing. They are telling all these people that this is the story. This is the story. And there's more than one World's Fair. So it's kind of like the Buffalo Bill traveling shows that they used to have. And they'd go from town to town to town, and they'd reenact the Wild West. And people would believe that that's what the Wild West was like. And maybe there was some truth to that, but it wasn't the totality of what the Wild West was like. It was the theatrical portrayal of the Wild West. So people would live with those ideas of the Wild West in their brain. It's the same thing with these World's Fairs. This is the story of our world. This is the story of these people. This is how they got here. This is how we got here. And oh, by the way, there's also these very interesting pieces of technology which we will introduce you to. And as we move into the second great industrial revolution, which will take place in about 7 years, surprisingly, after these World's Fairs, you'll remember some of these things, but they won't be the same as you remember them. Because what they're doing is they are kludging technology that will be used in the future. And then people will remember, go, oh yeah, I remember that at the World's Fair, but it's not exactly the same. It's not exactly, it's a copy, right? And this is where we get into Gemini, right? Gemini is the copy. And it almost feels like that after these World's Fairs, that the world becomes a bit of a degraded copy of the world that they were depicting, and the world that was more than likely being exposed to the people that were there. So it's also very interesting that we get into the automobile, because Gemini rules driving. And what does Neptune rules? Fuel, right? Neptune is fuel. Gasoline, diesel, oil, liquid, it's all Neptunian stuff. And then what does Gemini do? It rules driving. So, of course, 1893, this is where Pluto, Neptune meet, right? Trying to Saturn. Now we're going to make it official. You can't drive unless you have a license plate. You can't drive. Now, that's not universal yet. Of course, the French are the first to get there. But I feel like this is a really important conjunction at this time. It's almost like, again, they're like two worlds in one. There's copies of worlds. Now, there's some really interesting placements going on here. Saturn is exalted in Libra. Uranus is exalted in Scorpio. So we have exaltation, Jupiter in Taurus, exaltation. Right? So we have three major planets in their exaltation. Mercury is in rulership on the day that this opens. So now we have a planet in rulership. Now we have another planet in rulership, which is Venus. Like, these are, pretty ideal conditions to start a World's Fair, but also just the conditions of the time. Now, if you go back and you look at Uranus and Scorpio, which takes place in the late 60s, but starting around let's see what we have, Uranus and Virgo. So let's see, 70 goes into Uranus and Libra. So about 7 years. So between roughly 77 to about 84, that's when Uranus is in Scorpio. And you look at that time, you will see an incredible amount of technological development. Apple comes online, Microsoft comes online, the first nodes of ARPANET are connected, Tandy's got their computer rocking the marketplace. Like, it is a major time for the rise of technology. It's the same thing here, right? So Uranus is in Scorpio. Now, remember, 7 years out, it will go into Sagittarius, but those 7 years will be the thrust for the second great industrial revolution. They're gathering all of the patents. They're gathering all of the machinery. They're getting everything that they will need in order to incorporate those technologies so that somebody will own the patent of those technologies. And you can even see that with this inconjunct. Like, what is really going on here with this Pluto-Neptune conjunction and the inconjunct with Uranus? Like, people don't see what's happening. It is, in some ways, I would say it's a historical and technological theft on grand proportion. And then what's happening is that there is a duplicate world that's being made, right? So the things that would be used, let's just go real far out into Tartaria world, that the things that were used in quote unquote Tartaria world have a stepped down, lesser, degraded version. However, to the public, when the amnesia has fully settled in, it will appear to be new. And so we'll have, and there will even be some holdover things. When you look at stuff from the early 1900s, if you've ever watched people like Andrea Zertis or Ben the Archivist, some of these people, Martin Liedtke goes on and on and on, and 3 hours of just mind-blowing fucking illustrations. Like, what the fuck is that? What is that? What is that? So some of this stuff continues to sort of leak through up into the early 1900s. But by the time we get into the First World War, whatever remnants of this world that had existed is beginning to be destroyed, right? And even John talks about that today on his show, that these wars they're about a lot of different things. Redrawing boundaries, the acquisition of resources, the displacement of people, but it's also, in the case of World War I, World War II, and some of these other wars, some of them are even minor wars, who was it? Was it the Taliban or Al Qaeda that blew up the giant Buddhas? Like, why? Why would they do that? I know, I get it. It's like, it's not Muslim. It's not kosher Muslim, whatever that would be. It's not halal. But again, it's destroying something that, people don't get to see the grandeur of, and then ask the question, well, how did they do that? Right? So World War I will set in, and then the things that emerge from that period of time begin to be the incorporated and patented version of the things that people are witnessing, seeing, and experiencing vis-a-vis these World's Fairs. Right? So I think that this is a very interesting chart for 1893 in general, because this World's Fair this chart has so much to it, right? Let's just look at the Taurus part. We'll just stick with Taurus. What is Taurus all about? It's all about living on the earth, right? The thing we call the earth, the realm. It's grounded. Like, this is the story. right? And Jupiter is abundant. We're going to bring more of the earth or more of the world to this World's Fair, to this exposition. We'll bring it to this place. That's the role Jupiter plays. So I would say that for 6 months, that this is very intense Earth school, and that they are machine learning people, so that if they need to flip the switch and World War I becomes the war that ends all wars, that they have already introduced people to these ideas of transcendentalism, or this syncretic idea that's behind the Baha'i faith. Now, how many people at the World's Fair or the World Congress of Religion are really going to understand this material? Not many. But I'll tell you who will understand the material are the clergy, because the clergy would go. They would definitely go. The whatever kind of professorial or academic class would also attend, so that they could begin to espouse and then distribute these ideas. So this is all about Earth School with all of this Taurus, right? We're just going to chunk this off. This is all Earth School. Over here, we have this realm of ideas, right? Gemini is all about, especially here with Mars, like first day, are you kidding me? Mars is in Gemini. I just put 7 a.m. It's probably a little bit later. Maybe they open at 8. But I'm giving it a Gemini rising sign here, because there's so much activity. There's so much eye candy. And everything here is also go, go, go. You know, Mercury in Aries, true node in Aries. It's like that's the beginning of something, right? And even when you get into the true node here at 28, since we know that the nodes move backwards, it's really at the beginning of the nodal cycle for the World's Fair, right? So it's like, this is new. This is brand new. This is your new world. And with Mercury in Aries, it's like, okay, these are new ideas, fresh thoughts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And you've got this Mercury-Mars sextile, and it's just like overstimulation. And I think, again, I see this as a version of machine learning. So here we have Aquarius on the midheaven. So we could go a little bit forward in time, and we might have a different midheaven, which would be Pisces. But for now, we'll just use this as the anchor. And I think this is really interesting too, when we have Juno and Chiron together, because Juno is all about fertility, and again, something new, right? It's this new thing. It grabs a hold, especially of Leo, of the imagination. And Chiron there, I think, is quite interesting in that maybe perhaps with Chiron and Leo, that people would be more open to something new, right? Because it's a fixed sign, and it almost feels kind of anti-Chironic, right? It's like, or anti-Leo. It's huge crowds, it's group orientation, and everybody there theoretically seems to be equal, right? Like if you look at fashion, a lot of people are dressed very similar, very, very similar. So there seems to be a democratic feeling about this experience. Now, the moon is in Capricorn specifically on this day, right? So this is the given day, May 3rd. So the moon is in Capricorn on this day. And I think just what's the word I'm looking for? as a placeholder, I think the moon in Capricorn is really interesting. Because when I think of like social engineers, or what John would call the inheritors, I do think of Capricorn. You know, I think of the men in the tall hats. Like those guys in the tall hats, they know what the fuck is going on, right? They're part of the tall hat club. And to me, that seems very Capricornian. Like they're kind of at the top of a certain pyramid. They may not be at the top of the ultimate pyramid, but they're like, you know, if it was like Amway, they'd be the head of a particular region of Amway, but they wouldn't be the head of Amway in total, right? So it starts here with the moon in Capricorn, and it almost feels, you know, that moon in Capricorn to me is like, it's really interesting because when we've talked about this before in the show, where there's this idea where Saturn was the original sun and it emitted this purple light, like everything that we're seeing now tends to be very purple. Even my new fucking gym is purple. And it's not Planet Fitness. And it's so funny because I talked to the guy, I had to re-sign him for my gym. And I said, yeah, I like your gym. I said, I came back from vacation or I came back from being sick and the gym has changed now. It's like it's a new gym. He says, yeah. I said, how do you like it? I said, I don't know. I have to look around and check it out. I said, there's a lot of purple here in this gym. Oh, really? I said, yeah, it's a lot of purple. Do you know about purple? And he says, no. I said, do you like a good conspiracy theory? I said, sure. So I started to tell him about purple, right? And he said, well, corporate had been wanting to make the change for a while, and we just thought, let's go ahead and do it. So that's Anytime Fitness, and their corporate colors are the same corporate colors now as Planet Fitness, and they have no affiliation with them whatsoever. It's purple. So we see this kind of oversaturation of purple now. Anyway, so the idea is that the Earth at one point in time has Saturn as the primary sun. It's a different kind of light. It's more purple, kind of magenta purple. And as a result, the world is never fully in darkness, right? There's no 12-hour cycle. It's all kind of like sort of a more brightly luminescent purple to a less luminescent purple, but it's kind of constant. And then the idea is that it's a very tropical Garden of Eden-y like place, extremely high oxygen levels, everything is big. And that at a certain point, this is just my theory, although some people share the theory, that this thing called the moon is moved into place. And once the moon is moved into place, everything changes. And I've always found that the Egyptian name of the moon is Sin, right? And that's where we begin to have the dialogue of sin and the Garden of Eden and the world being fallen. And what's interesting is that when you look at the symbol of the moon like this, it looks like an apple that you've taken a bite out of, right? So when you have the moon in Capricorn, you have this bastardization hybrid of Saturn and the moon. And again, I'm not talking about your chart. Well, you have it anyway. But the meaning here is a little bit different, right? So I feel like it's an interesting place for the moon to be on this day when they open it. And I do think that these events, whether they're wars or expositions, that there is an astrological understanding of what's going on with these events. Like when I look at Israel's chart and I look at Balfour's natal chart, he's like all over it. I mean, conjunction. Are you kidding me? Like, that's just a coincidence? I don't think so. Somebody knew what they were doing. So I feel like this day with the moon, it goes back to Ben Franklin. You know, when Ben Franklin, the story, the Declaration of Independence, right, is that they started the signing process on July 4th. It didn't finish until later when they had collected all the signatures. But the first signature happens on July 4th. Now, some people were itching to have it done sooner. Franklin, who understood astrology and he understood the moon, knew that if they had signed when they had wanted to sign, that the moon would have been in Capricorn. Therefore, it would have been in detriment. And he did not want that for the country. The moon in Aquarius is much more akin to this idea, an ideal of Atlantis, that people like Ben Franklin and the Baconites were very intrigued with. And so he pushed back. And when the moon went into Aquarius, it's like, okay, let's put the John Hancocks down, right? So he had a foreknowledge of where that moon needed to be. And I would be very surprised if the people with this event did not have the same foreknowledge. Like, okay, we could open on, on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, whatever. They chose this day. I guess they had a soft open on the 1st. But I think the moon in Capricorn here is a very interesting position for the moon, because it's the combination, right? It is the combination of Saturn, the father, and Moon, the mother. And there's a grand trine. Well, it's not quite a grand trine, but there's a trine with Jupiter. So again, if you're looking to get people to theoretically machine learn, right, this trine with Jupiter would be a really, really good one. And you also have a trine with Pallas, which would be really good as well, right? Pallas, all about pattern recognition, right? Oh, look, here's an elephant. Oh, elephant, Africa, Africa. Oh, person over there with the bone in their nose, right? All of this is going on in this chart. And it's all going on at this time in 1893. So we have another in conjunct with Saturn in Libra, with Jupiter in Taurus. And again, Saturn being the ruler of Capricorn, right? Plays a little bit of a mix here. Saturn moon square. And for me, there's two things that really stand out about this chart. It's non-attachment. There's hardly any water in this chart. You have Uranus and you have the vertex. That's it. The vertex is a bit arbitrary because I'm using 7 a.m. as the time. So this whole thing becomes very, what? Temporary. Temporary. So when the structures come tumbling down at a certain point, where's the memory? Where's the memory of the place? And the Saturn moon square, to me, is also sort of this destruction of this idea of home, right? Or this idea of the past. Because the moon in Capricorn has both elements of the past and the future in it. The moon itself looks to the past. Saturn looks to the past, present, and the future. So the moon in Capricorn has both elements, right? So Saturn in Libra here squares the moon and in some ways becomes a bit of a wrecking ball, right? For memory, for place, for this period in time. What's interesting is that as we're going through this tonight, there's a moon-moon conjunction. So we're literally reenacting the moon phase of May 5th. And here we are, it's August 18th. Kind of interesting. So I feel like this period of time is really beguiling and paradoxical and how the chart is set up, how it's set up based on this Pluto-Neptune conjunction. And again, when you get into Gemini, you're getting into like copies. A copy of one world and a copy of another world. And this is what's happening. This is what's taking place. So for me, this is a very, very important time, because also remember, this is just one minute detail. One of the key factors in all of this was the fact that they standardized Ohm in 1893 at the Chicago Columbian Exposition. So they're defining the electrical parameters of the physical world at this time. Now, there's another updated version of Ohm. It comes in 1948, but it is not anything that radically changes the perception of electricity or energy as it begins to register resistance. So this is defining the physical world, right? And what's happening for all these people at this World's Fair, and then others that will be before and after, is that they are being indoctrinated into this idea of the story of the world. This is what's happening. And yet there's a story of another world that they are participating with and cohabitating with for a very brief period of time. It's almost like this Pisces Vesica, right? Where this is the old world and this is the supposed new world. And they're right there in the center at the Columbian Exposition in 1893. And then ultimately the worlds will separate, and this will be the new world that people will then inhabit. So Chicago is a really important place in this regard. St. Louis is called the gateway to the West. And I think that there's probably some truth to that. But Chicago is, I think really that it's not quite the center point of the country, but it does represent the sort of the heart of America. And in fact, I used to, I've told this story before, I used to know this guy, Gordon Davidson. And Gordon was an interesting character. Like he worked for the Lucis Trust, which is the company that produces all of Alice Bailey's books, right? And I would say, and by the way, my heart goes out to Gordon if he's still alive, because he lost his wife, Corinne, probably about 10 years ago, I think. They were very tight people. I got to know them a little bit. You could look them up, Gordon McLaughlin, and Gordon Davidson and Corinne McLaughlin. You can look them up. You'll find them on Google. Anyway, so Gordon one time told me that there were different, and we've talked about this before, there were different cities in America that represent different chakras. And Chicago is the heart chakra. So it is like the heartland. And then the other cities that he mentioned was New Orleans was the second chakra. New York was the third chakra, and Los Angeles was the fifth chakra. I don't know what the pineal or the crown or the first chakra was. Those are the ones that he mentioned. But that's kind of Chicago. Like, it is the heart, right? And you can even see this with like the World's Fair. You know, new blood is coming in, or old blood is coming in, new blood is coming out, right? That's kind of the role that this exposition plays. The old blood, which is the old world, comes in, and the new blood comes out, which is waves of indoctrinated people taking things that were more than likely here way before people were aware of it, co-opting them, stepping them down, and then putting them into this kind of assembly line model for the next industrial revolution. And with Mars and Gemini, there's a high degree of busyness, a flurry of activity, which will go along with the entirety of the World's Fair itself. So I think this is really, really fascinating. This is kind of the groundwork for Chicago. And when I realized that this is where they standardize Ohm defined by the physical relationship with electricity and energy and resistance, it's like, okay, what else are they defining here? They're really defining this new version of the realm. Okay, so let's move ahead in time. All right. Okay, before I do that, why don't we take a look at the chart of Chicago itself? Okay, let's get into the chart of Chicago itself. It's a very interesting chart. Okay. I hope you guys are enjoying this so far. I get a little geeked out on it at times. Okay, so this is Chicago. And oh, look at this. Right? Look at this. Chicago formed on August 17th. So happy birthday, Chicago. We're about a day late. I guess you get a couple days to celebrate, right? Here we go. August 7th, 1803, 1:28 p.m. So Chicago is a Leo. And one of the things you'll see, like with that chart that we just looked at, we saw Uranus and the moon kind of hanging out. And then you had a little bit of Saturn down here, a little zigzaggy, but a lot of clustered activity, basically from the ascendant going to house 11. Same thing here. Lots of clustered activity. This is a classic funnel chart right here. Classic funnel chart. Neptune to Venus, contents. This is the focal point, or what they call the spigot. Chicago is a Sag rising city. And it's got the sun in the 9th house. I think it works for Chicago. I think it works for Chicago. I mean, Chicago is a town that is filled with immigrants. And even if you look at the Chicago World's Fair, the 1893 Columbian Exposition, they're bringing the world to Chicago, which is very Sagittarian, incredibly 9th housey, right? So Chicago is not born on a solar eclipse. Within 14 days, there'll be a lunar eclipse in Chicago. So this is just 14 days pre-lunar eclipse. That's interesting. So the moon tomorrow, when the convention starts, will be in Aquarius. And Chicago's moon is in Leo, so we have a lunar-lunar opposition. I don't think that goes well. Honestly, I don't think it goes well. I mean, just from a chart perspective alone, it does not go well. Now, the moon will be conjunct the true node of Chicago in Aquarius. That's interesting too. Like even that exposition was very Aquarian in a lot of ways. Like it was new and all these inventions and again, sort of the collectivist mindset. They're talking about Baha'i, which is to me a very syncretic kind of collectivist religion, even though it's probably just a small portion of the Chicago World's Fair, an adjunct at that, because it was part of the world religion get together, right? This is a fascinating chart, really, really fascinating chart. And we can see this idea with the sun in Leo that Chicago really does represent like the heart chakra of the United States, because Leo rules the heart. And I think the South Node here is quite interesting as well, because it feels like, this is just me, but it feels like that South Node is parasitic. And that there's something about Chicago that has a lot to do with debt. And when I say debt, I'm not talking about monetary debt, although as a city, it has probably been in much better shape financially than it is now. But it almost feels like I don't like to use the word karma, because I don't really believe in that in the way that a lot of people do. But the story about the goat and the Chicago Cubs and the curse of the Cubs, and then you get to Steve Bartman and how he, theoretically, it's not just him, but this other guy, reach out and then they interfere with the fly ball so that Moises Alou can't catch it. There's something about Chicago that has this weird vibe about it that it almost can't get out of its own way as a city. I think some of this also is this Neptune square that's going on with all these planets. And that's where it feels parasitic to me. Right? Like Neptune in the 12th house for Chicago, these vested interests, these special interests. And it's like vampiric. You know, when Neptune was in Scorpio, like in my chart, and all of us, you know, Generation Jones people, you know, what were we into? Like, we were into like goth music, and you know, we were kind of into like dark stuff. You know, we were kind of into like dark, you know, I love me some Bauhaus and Love and Rockets, and you know, like that kind of, that it's a vein that runs through us. And we're also a generation that is, you know, not afraid of like dabbling in the occult or the esoteric. So Chicago has it, and there's some positive benefit to it. But here, and I brought that up because there's something a little vampiric with Neptune in Scorpio. And I remember when I was a kid, when was this? Well, in the 60s, you started to have a run on vampire films. Like, you had Christopher Lee as Dracula, who was very, very popular. That was a very popular Dracula movie. You had the Vampire Killers, which I believe was directed by Roman Polanski. That's all Neptune and Scorpio. So this idea of vampires and Dracula really start to like, Dark Shadows. Do you remember the TV show Dark Shadows? That was popular, I believe, around 1969. Neptune is at the end of Scorpio, but it's still in Scorpio, right? So you can kind of see where Neptune and Scorpio can be very vampiric. And then what is it doing here? It's sucking off the blood of the city, literally, right? There's something about Chicago. There's an element to this Neptune in Chicago. I'm going to go with supernatural. And is it because there is the destruction and the desecration of the city that was known as Chilaga before it was Chicago, right? Are there literally spirits that live and inhabit a city? And do they take on like egregoric thought forms in people's lives? Does it become the spirit of the city? Because everybody's on the fucking payroll in Chicago, right? It's a city that's known for graft and corruption and greed. Other cities are too. New York, you know, you have the LaGuardia machine, Tammany Hall, right? You have all these things, but Chicago always floats right to the top, right? And even this idea of Al Capone and the underworld, which is generally a 8th house kind of deal, you know, but we could put it over here in the 12th house. Speakeasies were really big in Chicago, especially during Prohibition. Whorehouses, you know, opium dens. Later on, you know, Chicago gets into other heavy action, crack houses. And I mean, it's one of these things that never really quite goes away with Chicago. And it's like this spirit that is just leeching off of the life force of the city. And it's a very interesting square to the city. And I know that there are people that love Chicago who live there. I've been there a few times. I've enjoyed, you know, being there. And it really seems like, all right, I'm gonna go way out on a limb here. Way out on a limb. If America, this country, wanted to change the entire country, all they would have to do is change Chicago. That's it. That's it. If they could clean up Chicago and get it to a point where it's not hemorrhaging money, blood. I mean, think of all the murders that happened in Chicago. It almost feels like these gangland murders that happen on a very frequent basis in Chicago are just part of an ongoing series of human sacrifice. That's what it feels like, right? And then you have stories like the Mothman and Candyman, and they all come out of Chicago, right? There's this kind of really weird sort of supernatural, you know, narrative with Chicago. So this would be, and when we think of Chicago, we just think of the worst fucking mayors, right? From Rahm Emanuel, Lori Lightfoot, and now you've got this other dude. Did I go blank? Hold on, where'd we go? Oh, let me get back here. What happened? Here we go. You know what I'm saying? I mean, think of it. Barack Obama, you know, is not from Chicago, but that's where he learns, you know, the tricks of his trade. Bill Ayers is from Chicago. I mean, I could just go down the list here with Chicago. And it just feels like it can't get out of its own way. Why? It's this Neptune square. There's always somebody sticking their fangs in the neck of this city. I remember when my aunt was she was way ahead of her time. Way ahead of her time. She was a precursor of white guilt and a liberal white female. And she joined Vista. She's a Virgo. I won't fault her too much. She was just living out her sign, right? So she's a Virgo, and she joins Vista, and she goes to live with this family in South Chicago to theoretically help them. Like, what is she there to do for these people? Is she there to translate the white world to them? I don't know. I don't know what her role was, right? But the family she lived with, ironically, were named the Whites. So my aunt went to Chicago to help a black family whose last name was White. I think it's funny. I'm sorry. I think it's very funny. Anyway, that's Chicago, right? Like that is Chicago. Let's set up this inner city. Jesse Jackson, Chicago. If they could stop the bloodsuckers, the leeches, the vampires in that city, I guarantee you the rest of America would start to get cleaner. Because if we're looking at Chicago as the heart chakra, and we have evidence here. The sun is in freaking Leo. We're one day off of its birthday. One day off. Right? So I believe we're making a case. And even with the new moon in Leo, it's like it's vibrant, intense. You know, Chicago was one of those places when people left the South, when large chunks of the Black population left, they went to Chicago. Went to Chicago, they went to Detroit, they went to St. Louis, right? They went to Cleveland, they went to these large manufacturing centers. And when they went there, what did they do? Like, this is our new home. This is where we're going to, you know, be part of, you know, theoretically the American dream. So that new moon is all about enthusiasm, right? Filling your cup. And sort of, you know, living life with a degree of gusto. But again, with this Neptune square, all of that is consistently compromised. Consistently compromised. I feel sorry for, I mean, I'm just looking at this chart. I kind of feel sorry for the city. And that's not the only squares. So here, let's get into this. Saturn in Virgo, which tends to be very working class and very democratic. Have you ever known Chicago to be a hardcore Republican city? Not in my lifetime. Maybe sometime in the 1950s, possibly. But in my lifetime, nothing but Democratic mayors, right? So Saturn in the 10th house, conjunct the midheaven. It's all about working class. Then we have Mars also in Virgo, right? Mars-Saturn conjunction. A lot of industry. You have the cattle yards in Chicago, right? So it's not just a pretty city, you know, with a glimmering skyscraper. Chicago is a very hard-working town, right? It's always had a reputation of being a hard-working town. And then you have Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Libra, right? 10th house. And all of these are off in their squaring. They're squaring off against Chiron and mostly Chiron because of... So again, the Chiron square, I believe, makes it quite difficult for this city to get ahead. And Chiron in Sagittarius, in as much as it's a Sag rising, right? And then we have all these planets in the 9th house. I think that with Chiron here, there's clearly, I would say that this is a class issue. Because Sagittarius can be, at times, very judgmental. It can be a very judgmental sign. And Chiron in Sagittarius, okay, here, I got the perfect example for this. Perfect example. Bill Ayers, right? Bill Ayers is typical of somebody who comes through academia. He becomes a professor. Bill Ayers is a professor. Bernadine Dorn is a professor, right? And with Chiron in Sagittarius, how does this look through their eyes, right? So they theoretically, being leftists or being socialists, would view this as being quite different, right? They come from an elite background. Bill Ayers is elite. So what you also have the University of Chicago in Chicago, which has always been kind of at the forefront of just about everything. Milton Friedman comes out of the University of Chicago. The new school of criticism comes out of the University of Chicago, right? So you have this kind of intellectual, academic intelligentsia, which I think, with the exception of Milton Friedman, who I like, which suffers from some degree of guilt, right? Because either they intrinsically know that their standard of living, their theoretical level of intelligence or IQ sets them apart from other people that are in Chicago. These are the working class people. So whether they're working class in the sense that they fix your car, or they're working class in the sense that they're the working poor, right? I think, this is what I think, that these academics with Chiron in Sagittarius have this plan and this idea, right? Who else comes from Chicago? Mr. Rules for Radicals himself, right? He comes from Chicago, and he comes from a bit of an academic background, even though he's a criminologist. And they all have these ideas about how to deal with the working class and the working poor. And that's where you get in with this square. So does that really work? Or is it another form of manipulation? You know, are they trying to, again, theoretically work out their intellectual angst or their intellectual ivory tower position by creating program after program after program? It's weird, right? But you can see it here. You can definitely see it with this square. Now we have this Venus sextile Uranus Jupiter, and I think that's kind of interesting, right? I think it's an interesting sextile. So how do I see it? Well, if you were able to get rid of the bloodsuckers and you were able to get rid of the parasites, people can get along there with that Venus sextile with Jupiter and Uranus. They'd be able to get along. But instead, everything's getting bled off here. Now, we do have some trine action going on. Sun, Mercury, Moon, trine Chiron, right? To me, that's the city being successful almost in spite of itself. You know, how many Cubs fans have been Cubs fans forever? Like, if you're a Chicago Bears fan, this could be your year, by the way. But if you're a Chicago Bears fan, right, like, you're not going to abandon your team. That's what I'm talking about with the sextile to Chiron. And it feels to me like there's some spirit here. Like, no matter how bad things can get, and they get pretty bad there, people can theoretically rise above. Right? That's the Chiron trine to Sun, Mercury, Moon. Like there could be some tacit understanding for other groups of people besides your own. Now we have, again, right, we have this yod going on. It's also part of the bucket. So what's going on here with Pluto? Okay, now we know Pluto is in Pisces, right? Pisces is ruled by Neptune. Neptune is in the 12th house, which is the ruler of Pisces. So it's a nice position for Neptune. But again, in order for this to take place, right? In order for this chart to somehow begin to pump lifeblood into the into the system. This Pluto's got to be reconciled. So there has to be a cleansing. There has to be a cleansing. There has to be some kind, and you know, I wish I'd looked at this earlier, honestly, because we just had a Saturn Pluto conjunction last year with Chicago's chart. And but again, it just feels like that there has to be some kind of a purging in order to transform this idea of what this city is. I don't think it's indistinct from. Is it indistinct from religion? It's a good question. I would say yes and no. The no part is because two signs are the two most religious signs, in my opinion, in astrology, are Sagittarius and Pisces. So we have to have some kind of a dialogue about religion with Pisces. So yes, that part would be true. But it could result in a religious-like experience that brings everybody together. That could be emblematic of what I'm talking about. It's in the third house. So it almost feels like Chicago needs kind of a brainwash, actually. And it's a city that I think suffers from both a great amount of, I would say it suffers, but it has a lot of pride. But on the other hand, it also has some real issues, some real self-esteem issues as a city. That's my sense. So it almost feels like there has to be this like psychological purging of all of these not so healthy thought forms. What's interesting is I think the effect of the immigrants, right, the migrants, which is very Sagittarian, right? They're showing up from other parts of the world. And what are they doing? They're getting in the wheelhouse of the working people. And we have, you know, the Black community in Chicago has sounded the alarm. They're not happy that the migrants are there. There's another version of your Chiron square. And I'm sure that the social engineers, you know, the great and gifted ones like Bill Ayers and the fat ass governor of the state who lives in Chicago, if I'm not mistaken, or near there, right? Whose family, the Pritzker family, is associated with Chicago. They all thought it was just a great idea. Well, that's getting their attention. And the third house is very local, right? So Chicago is one of these places that has intense local politics, but it has global implications. In the Yod, we have Venus right here with Pluto. And then the other part of the Yod is Jupiter, Uranus. Whoa. That's pretty heavy. That's pretty heavy. I think in the long scale of time, Chicago will not resolve this as an identity crisis or city for another 25 years. Because that's when it will have its Pluto return. About 25 years from now, right? Isn't that right? About 15 for Pluto through Aquarius. We'll call it 15 and change. 14 and change, we'll call it 15. And about another 5 years, 20 years. 20 years from now, When Chicago has its Pluto return, it has the opportunity to resolve all of this. But the idea with a bucket chart, so I have a bucket chart, and I have Saturn in the second house. That was a hard planet for me to work with in Capricorn for a long time. But once I started to finally get a handle on Saturn, right around the age of 40, the rest of my chart opened up. That's how bucket charts work. When you can master or get a handle on that, everything else opens up. And this can be a repository for all of these things, which can become very, very powerful. You have the entirety of the chart flowing into Pluto right there. It's like, oh my God, look at that. That's powerful. That's profound. Now, Saturn is going through Chicago's fourth house, which means they have to move. So Chicago, just as a city, has to move. Aren't there stories about moving buildings in Chicago? I think there is. That's a profound transit with Saturn in the second house and the fourth house. Now, it does go back to 14 degrees, which will put it right there on the cusp of the fourth house come November, right? And then it's going to come back in here again, and it starts that Saturn cycle again. And that's interesting. So there's something about that Saturn transit, Saturn opposition. Now we're back into that again. That's next year. Right, Saturn got to 19 degrees, and then it retrograded. So next year it gets to the Saturn opposition. Chicago's got to do something different. It's got to do something different. So this is, you get the Saturn opposition 3 times in your life. First time is at 14, right? The next time is at 44, and the next time is at 74. So it is a 30-year cycle. So the last time Saturn was in this part of the chart for Chicago was 1996. So it's coming to the end of that cycle. So Chicago should be running on 30-year cycles. And then every 30 years, they have to change something deep and fundamental about the city. And I do think that Saturn in the fourth house is indicative of the quote unquote migrant crisis that's going on there. Okay, what's going on with Mars is that transiting Mars, let me zoom in a little bit. We're going to start to get into the convention. So transiting Mars is at 17, right? So by the time we get into the heart of that convention tomorrow night, we got a Mars-Saturn square. That ain't good. That is not good. Nope. This is what? Restless energy squaring off against what? Authority. That'll be interesting. I mean, my thoughts about what could happen. If I were let's just say I was a candidate that had invested a great deal of money in Israel. And then, or that Israel had invested a great deal of money in a particular candidate. If I were either of those factions, I would pull out all the stops and pay as many people as I could to go to Chicago and make the Democratic convention a living fucking hell. That's what I would do. So it would be so bad that whatever Kamala Harris or the Democrats serve up, this other thing, and I don't want anything bad to happen to the people of Chicago. And after spending all this time here, I really like them, but I don't want anything bad to happen to them. But if I were her political opponent, I would make it look so bad that it would seem as if that they had absolutely zero control over any of it. That's unfortunately what I would do. Now, some of that will be natural. Chicago is a town that is known for protest. It is known for protest. So I think it's kind of a slam dunk. I just don't hope they fuck the city up too much. Now, at the same time, it's going to be sextiling Leo, right? You know, it would be very interesting. It would be very interesting if all this happens, and let's play that everything is sort of staged, fake, scripted, whatever. Right. So let's say all this starts to happen, but there's a very controlled element to this. And Kamala Harris comes out and addresses the crowd. Right. And so there's a certain amount of the crowd who knows that when she's talking to them, they stop and they listen. That's kind of an interesting concept here. I already talked about how I thought Kamala would go in between like a teen girl and, protect them from somebody who was bad mouthing them or something, right? But I could see something along these lines. It doesn't have to be her. Who knows? Maybe it's Tim Walz. I don't know. But somebody comes out and quells the crowd, like James Brown did the night that Martin Luther King got shot. Because that's the sextile. But there is conflict here with this chart in particular. And that's the Mars square. And it almost feels like with Mars in the 7th house, it's contracted. It's contracted out. A city with great spirit, 0 Sag on the ascendant. Right. I believe that no matter how down Chicago gets, it gets up. I think it's a glass half full city. I don't always think New York is a glass half full city. Sometimes. But I think Chicago is a glass half full city. So it's a very interesting chart. And it's one of these charts where I think it's very important to the world. And if we could heal this city, I'm telling you, the rest of America would begin to heal as well. I'm utterly convinced of that. All right, so let's go to the DNC of 1968. So this is when all hell was breaking loose. You'll see these things with Chicago, right? What do we have here? It's another extreme chart. So it's a city that does have these extreme moments in time. The exposition, a little bit more on the zigzag. Chicago itself, we're looking at something really similar, right? Bucket chart, Aquarius rising. This is August 26, 1968, 7 p.m., Chicago, Illinois. Shit is about to hit the fucking fan. Now, they hold the convention in the sign of Virgo. So this is a late convention. And the reason why it's a late convention is because they were fighting over where the convention was going to be held. They originally wanted the convention to be held in Houston. And that was because Lyndon Johnson was supposedly going to be the candidate, but he drops out, right? He drops out. So what happens is that they run the convention on August 26th. Now, keep in mind that Bobby Kennedy was killed in June, right? He's killed in June. He's killed June 6th, 1968. You take 1968, you add it up, that's 24 That's 6. So Bobby Kennedy is killed on 666. So now you've got that in the rearview mirror. You have Johnson stepping out, and the person that they want to nominate, of course, is Hubert H Humphrey, Triple H, which also happens to be a wrestling name. And there are people inside the Democratic Party that want Eugene McCarthy to become president. And it's a big fuck story. Right now, the mayor of Chicago is Richard Daley. And Richard Daley was even the Democratic mayor, but he didn't run the town like a Democratic mayor. He was a fucking hard ass. And he wanted to have the convention there to show off what a great fucking job he did as mayor. And then you have the Yippies, Jerry Rubin, right? Abby Hoffman, that whole crew. You have the SDS bunch. You have Bill Ayers and the Weather Underground. And these are the days of rage. And they're going to descend upon the Democratic convention, and they are going to wreak holy hell on the convention. And it's really weird. I don't know. They didn't go to the Republican convention and do this. You know what I mean? They did not go to the Republican convention and wreak holy. They did it to the Democrats, like the party that's probably closest to their, virulent, kind of proto-Marxist Bolshevik rage, right? They're going after those guys instead of that's a kind of an interesting side note. And the idea is that they want Eugene McCarthy to be the president or the nominee and not Humphrey. And McCarthy just doesn't have the votes, right? He's not going to get the votes. He's not going to be the guy, right? So inside of the auditorium, outside, it's holy hell. I mean, the cops are cracking heads. These guys are there wearing football helmets and stuff, getting ready for I'm sorry, they did not stand a chance against Richard Daley and his police force and whatever other National Guard he called out. He was going to whoop ass. Now, on the inside, there's a very heated debate about who is going to become the nominee. I mean, there was really a very deep ideological debate about McCarthy or Humphrey, even though Humphrey is running off of Johnson's fumes. That's the guy they want because they think that McCarthy will pull down out of the war and will be done. Whereas Humphrey would continue to run the Johnson war policy, which wasn't very good. So let's look at the chart. The True Node and Chiron are conjunct, and they're in Aries. So it's very warlike. Saturn is also in Aries, and here it's in detriment. And again, forming a yacht, just like the other Saturn that we saw in the chart. The sun is in Virgo. Again, it's a late convention for everything that I just mentioned. Mars is in Leo. Well, that's kind of where Mars is in the Chicago chart. But again, everything has to get resolved through here with Saturn. And at the end of the day, at the end of the convention, who's Saturn? It's Hubert Humphrey, and it's Mayor Daley, and it's the cracking of the heads. And that's how it's resolved. And you can see in some ways sort of the populist energy. To me, Virgo is a populist sign. It's like workers of the world. Virgo's the workers. Virgo, Taurus, they're the workers. They're in different sectors, but they're the workers. Like Virgo's postal workers. Like there's a postal union. There's all these unions. To me, they're very Virgoan. So you have a very they're Aquarian because they're groups, but they're not groups of CEOs, right? Virgo is the folk. So you have a very kind of heavy duty working class energy here lining up to be represented in this election. They want to be represented. And it doesn't really work out that way. It does not really work out that way. The moon is in Libra, so hope, it's like, well, cooler heads will prevail. Theoretically. Could have been worse, I'm sure. Right? It could have been worse. And then we have this square going on, which is a very kind of odd square. It's like on the outside of what? The sun? Neptune with the sun. Yeah, Sun-Neptune square. I see this as a very kind of confused agenda. And nobody really getting what they want out of this, except maybe this idea that the Democrats can't control their own people, so why should we elect them? And when you think of stuff like this, right? When you hear about the fact that Abby Hoffman was an informer. Also, the roots of the Weather Underground are very suspect. And they all come from these kind of elite families or semi-elite families. They go into this one weekend where SDS and all these radical student groups are meeting. And SDS is kind of Students for Democratic Society. They're the ones that are kind of running everything. And at the end, the Weather Underground gains power. They totally take control over the student movement. So now they're the ones that are running it. There are people who believe that actors in the Weather Underground had connections to the deep state, not the FBI, deep state. So we could talk about the CIA, we could talk NSA, like these are deep state players. Abby Hoffman is an informant. So let's play this out a little bit. Are these radicals who descend upon Chicago, are they feds? Some of them aren't. You have a lot of kids, you have some Pied Pipers, but are they feds? Because again, if they really wanted to damage the system, they would have gone to the Republican convention where Nixon was just a slam dunk, right? But because of this tension that existed inside the Democratic Party, it gave them this kind of weird in, right? So it doesn't go well for the Democrats. Why would you want to elect a Democratic president after witnessing these massive riots going on in Chicago? If I was alive, I wouldn't have. Now the question is, this is another question, would those riots have happened in Houston? I don't think so. I don't think they would have happened in Houston. And the reason why they wouldn't have happened in Houston is because even though the Chicago police were pretty handy with a nightstick, Texas police, especially Houston during that time, they just would have started arresting anybody, like as they're driving into town, right? They just would have pulled them over. And you would have to really drove to get to Houston, right? And there's also something about Chicago, and you go back to that chart, it's that Neptune square with all those Leo planets, right? And it's just leeching the opportunity or draining the blood and the life force out of the thing. So to me, it feels very scripted in some ways. And I think you have deep state players that are part of these student groups. that are fomenting all of this, right? So again, look at how extreme this is. You have to resolve the chart through Saturn, and it's in Aries, and it's in detriment, right? And here comes Chiron coming in and getting very close to the Saturn of the 1968 Democratic National Convention. And by this time, the Democrats are done, right? They're done. They're cooked. Nixon gets in 4 years, 68, 72, begins to start changing policy. There's nobody inside the Democratic Party. By the way, Jimmy Carter gave this is interesting. Jimmy Carter gave a speech during this convention. So Jimmy Carter was on the radar, and it would be a scant 8 years later when Jimmy Carter would run for president. So, they do that. Like, they'll throw somebody out there at a convention who will speak. And I guess it was Obama, right? When who was running for president? I think it was it Kerry? I think it was the Kerry election. No, it was the Mitt Romney election when Obama spoke at the Democratic. Oh, who's this guy? Wow, he's really articulate. We should keep an eye on him. And I think J.D. Vance did the same thing. Didn't he do the same thing in 2020? I think he spoke at the Republican National Convention. So they use these conventions to showcase who they want to spotlight. So keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on some of the speakers and people that are giving presentations or just speaking at this event. Not this one, but the one we're going to talk about. I mean, the only way that this thing is resolved is through force. And they're done. They're cooked. They're cooked. 4 years of Nixon, and then what happens? They decide to get back at Nixon, and they're going to have a regime change vis-a-vis Watergate, which I talked about on Frank's show. The guy that I talked about, Jeff Shepard, on Frank's show, 2 days later, he shows up on Tucker Carlson. And they're talking about kind of the same thing that me and Frank were talking about. So Nixon would have had free reign for the next 4 years. And he was in the process of really resetting the table. And they were like, no, we don't want this guy to reset the table. We don't want to get so far behind the eight ball that as a party, we're just completely irrelevant. And so eventually they were able to launch Jimmy Carter, try to revive the party. He's one and done, right? So this is where they get cooked. And they get their clocks cleaned. This is not a good chart for the Democratic Party. All right. So let's look at tomorrow, shall we? So it's supposed to start at 5:15 p.m. I think I have to have the exact time here. A bit less extreme, right? It is a bit less extreme. And here we have the sun at 27 degrees, and we have this full moon in Aquarius at 29:37, coming in and banging this T-square with Uranus. We got this Mars square going on with Saturn, right? Oh, well, that's conflict. Doesn't look good. Doesn't look good. Mars-Jupiter conjunction, where Jupiter is expanding the restless, violent, potentially violent nature of Mars in Gemini, squaring the sun. let's see, sextile Sun, sextile Mercury, squaring Venus, squaring Saturn. So we've been seeing this pattern for the last week. The difference with this pattern now is the tightness of the square, especially the Sun, Mars, Venus square. And then the other big difference is this moon opposing Mercury, Sun in Aquarius. And then Capricorn rising. I wonder what kind of a role Michelle Obama is going to play at this convention. Because she is a Capricorn Sun. What's the degree of her Sun sign? Let me just look at this real quickly. Okay. So Michelle Obama's Sun is at 26 Capricorn. So she's near the end of Capricorn. What's interesting is she has Saturn in Aquarius. So her Saturn will be conjuncting the moon at the start of the convention. Let me go back to this chart here. Okay, so her Sun is right here at 26. What's it doing? Well, it's trining Uranus. And this is the Obama's stomping grounds, right? She's from Chicago. When will she make an appearance? Will she make an appearance? Yes, she will. She'll make an appearance, I think, towards the end. Right? They kind of like build up, don't they? She'll make an appearance towards the end. That'll be interesting to see what kind of impact she has on this. Her moon is at 0 Pisces. So that's kind of interesting as well, because in later that night and then the next day, okay, so that's going to be what, Tuesday. All right, I think Michelle Obama makes an appearance on Tuesday because her moon, there'll be a moon conjunction with Michelle Obama in her chart. That's my. So how long is this convention? Is it 3 days? I think probably tomorrow, but she will make an appearance, and it will be significant. It'll be significant. Now, is she going to replace Kamala? No, she won't. But she'll make, I think, such an impression that people who are in the party will begin to think about the possibility of Michelle Obama. I don't think they're going to replace Kamala. They can't, unless the drinking thing becomes a significant issue. Now, there's also a yod here with Pluto and Neptune to Mercury. So if I was one of Kamala's handlers, I'd say, girl, you better be sober for 48 hours. But I'm not sure if, let's talk a little bit about alcohol and Kamala Harris. She might be somebody who needs alcohol to function. And so we're kind of bordering on alcoholic territory. Can she hang 48 hours and be in the limelight without being smashed? She better. Because I'll tell you why in a second when we do her chart. So you're going to hear things at this convention that are going to blow your mind. You're going to hear things like, what the fuck did I just hear? What did I just hear? Because remember, Mercury is retrograde. And it's retrograded back, right? Retrograded back into Leo 25? Yeah. Interesting. These are the things that people say and they want to take them back. Like the words come out of their mouth and they're trying to like reel them back in, but they can't. Shocking statements. Shocking statements are made. Like real what the fuck. My sense is that you got a group of people who are amateurs. This is amateur hour. Kamala Harris is not an amateur. She's a professional, if you know what I mean. But in terms of this level, this exposure, this heat, this volume, we'll see what she's made of. I'm going to get her chart, and we're going to look at her chart. And I'm going to sign off here pretty soon. It's getting pretty late. But we're gonna lay Kamala out. Just the whole thing of Kamala lot. It's just it's despicable. Meanwhile, Trump is running for president of Israel. Okay, so let's do this. He's doing a very good job. All right, where are we? Give me 1 sec here. All right, there's Chicago. DNC 24. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm looking for. All right. All right, so here we go. So we have Harris's chart in the center and the DNC on the outside. And there's this Moon Saturn conjunction that's happening tomorrow, literally on her chart. She has Saturn at 28 Aqua. The convention begins with the Moon in Aquarius conjunct her Saturn. I don't think this is good for her. She's got Sun Mercury opposing her Saturn. Not good. Mars Jupiter fairly close to her ascendant, but it is really afflicted, right? Squaring, transiting Saturn in her 10th house, and then squaring her Pluto, Uranus, Venus in her 4th house. Okay, so I think that when the moon moves into Pisces in her 10th house, something scandalous happens with Kamala Harris. Maybe it's the drunken moment. If she, okay, so she'll still be around until when? Wednesday, isn't that right? Wednesday. And by the time Wednesday rolls around, that moon has got to traverse her Chiron. It's got to cross Saturn, transiting Saturn, and conjunct Neptune. I would say that Tuesday night is a huge, huge challenge for Kamala Harris. Huge. I mean, I'm wondering if she'll even make it to the stage. I think she probably will, but I'm telling you, man, this transit, this lunar transit right here, coming in, transiting Saturn, Saturn under Chiron, opposing Pluto, opposing Uranus, opposing Venus, squaring, transiting Mars, Jupiter. To me, this is scandalous. There's something scandalous with Pisces up here. When the moon transits the 10th house in a person's chart, and especially when they are under the spotlight, it's going to go one of two ways. Either the people will buy it hook, line, and sinker, and they will be under the spell of that person, because the moon in the 10th house is all about like mass movements and, mass psychology, the psychology of crowds, right? That's all the moon. It's all about like hysteria, like the Beatles in 1964. And it's all about girls, right? It's lunar. It's all kind of hysteria. And it's lunacy. So it'll go one or two ways for Kamala. She'll either like witch this thing out and fly out of there on a broom, right? And zoom into the election cycle, juiced up and powered up. In this and all the while creating kind of a spell over people. Or the opposite will happen, and something scandalous erupts during this time. There's no two ways about it. But she's not going to be mid about any of this. I think it's probably the latter. I think it's the latter. Early on, the moon, like say tomorrow night, that moon comes in and trines her sun and trines Mercury, which I think initially works for her. But by the time we get into that kind of midpoint moon phase around 19, it's out of that trine with Mercury. She has Mercury at what? 1 Scorpio? Yeah, 1 Scorpio. So the moon has moved out. So she gets a boost, I'd say, at the early part of the convention. And I'm just wondering if this is also somehow related to what goes on with Michelle Obama. I'm curious. Because her son, meaning Kamala's son, and Michelle Obama's son, they're in conflict with one another. I'll tell you right now, those two women, they may say the right things about each other, but I guarantee you, or whatever they are, they don't like each other. These are two people that fundamentally do not like each other for whatever reason. They've got a sun square cardinal sign. They don't like each other. Kamala's moon is in Aries. Michelle's moon is in Pisces. Very different emotional operating systems. So I think and again, they're not going to come out and flip all their votes for Michelle Obama, but she will be somebody that will be important at this election. And I think that they're really going to lean on her when she does speak to try to sell Kamala. And I wonder if it's going to happen. You know, these people have such fragile egos, and they're all in this very weird kind of Jenga relationship with each other. And if you move one of the Jenga pieces too abruptly, or it's not the right piece, the whole thing comes down, right? It's all fine when all the Jenga pieces are together. They're a unified front. But when you start moving them around, that's when it gets really, really shaky. And I think it's going to go, again, we'll just size it up one more time. It goes one of two ways for Harris. One, she casts a spell over the rest of the nation and flies off on her broom, or something between now and Wednesday is scandalous. And it might even be a scandal that grows. Like Michelle Obama was supportive of Kamala, but she wasn't she was not enthusiastic of her support for the candidate. Things like that. But it could be even bigger than that. So it's going to be, look, I'm going to watch it. Unlike the Republican thing, I didn't have a lot of interest. I have interest in watching this. Because number one, it's in Chicago. And we already know that I think there's going to be issues. And number two, when you have that amount of pressure, people are going to crack, and they're going to do things and say things, especially during a Mercury retrograde, that you're going to go, what? So get your DVRs out, because there are going to be some recordable moments during this that are going to be unintentionally humorous, head scratching, and outright what? What did I just hear? And it'll be interesting to see if Kamala makes it out of this thing unscathed. It's one or the other. The witch on her broom, or the brewing scandal of Kamala Harris. It'll be must-see TV. All right. So thank you for look, everything else. So it's okay. The world is falling apart. We're having UFO sightings right and left. Monkeypox is on the horizon. It's just business as usual. Business as usual. Guys walking out of airplanes. No problem. No problem. Just do your best to stay sane. Right? Just do your best to stay sane and just take care of business. Keep your body clean. Keep your spirit clean to the best of your ability. Right? Treat each other well. You know, every day is an expression of God to the best of your ability. Sometimes we fall, sometimes we trip, but we pick ourselves up. Sometimes other people are there to help pick us up and remind us that it's okay, right? Or sometimes they're there to remind us that, hey, it's not okay. And, you need to, figure out, where your priorities are in your life. Those are good friends, by the way. Just do your best to cultivate that. You know, there are some dark issues on the horizon. I look at what's happening in places like Ireland and England and some of these places in Europe, and I'm very concerned about those people in those countries, and I'm concerned about our people in this country as well. And I would be remiss if I did not mention this, and that you need to be aware of what's going on. When I say aware of what's going on, you need to be aware of what's going on when it comes to people that are here that aren't supposed to be here and have the ability to organize in ways that are unlike anything we've ever seen before in this country. And you could do that, you could do whatever you want with that information. But if I were you folks out there, I'd make sure I was in good physical shape to the best of your ability. And I would certainly make sure that if a shit hits the fan moment, that you're at least able to begin to address the idea that you can secure the safety and security or the sanctity of your home and the people that you are there with. And I feel pretty strongly about that. Without being a doom and gloom guy, because if you don't do that and it happens. So last night, I'll just leave on this story. Maybe I'll try to leave on a funny story. So last night, we were out to dinner. And we were at one of these tapas restaurants. And we're sitting at like a row of two tops. So there's a bench, table. And I'm looking at who's sitting in the chairs. It was interesting because so the couple next to us, dude in the table, woman in the bench. Couple next to us, dude at the end of the table, woman in the bench. Next to them, dude at the table, woman in the bench. And we're flipped. So I'm looking at these three dudes. And I said to myself, okay, if there was like a horde of I like to use Venezuelans, or some Venezuelans that are cool. But let's say there is a horde of migrants, right? But scary masks, right? High testosterone, from war environments that we're not a part of, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Somalia, whether it's Haiti, where there's always seemed to be like a war going on there. These people are from those areas. Those are the conditions that they live in. They know that shit, right? And so, what would it be like if you got them here, fed them really good food for about a year, trained them up, gave them some ammo, some arms, and said, okay, here's the plan. Go out and meet the populace. So I looked at these guys. I said to myself, how would these dudes do in a situation like that if they had to confront these kinds of people that they had never, ever confronted before in their entire lives? And it was not a value judgment. It was just a question I was asking. And you never know what some people are capable of, right? Some people on the surface may look rather, I don't want to use the word soft, but let's say urbanized. But you never know what somebody's capable of. They might be able to, once they process the shock, okay, let's get down to business, right? But it was a question I was asking myself. And it didn't really come to a concrete answer, but I thought it would be challenging, especially that initial wave. Isn't that a pleasant thought to end the show on? If you want unintentional comedy, watch the next 3 nights at the DNC, because it won't just be comedy. It'll be interesting, because there'll also be like a real vying for attention with what's going on outside. Most of the major news outlets, if there is friction and tension, and I expect there to be, will do their best to downplay it, unless, of course, they've gotten the memo to turn the volume up so Kamala looks bad. That's a different story. But that'll be interesting to watch, right? Like what's being shown on theoretical network TV versus what's being shown on live streamers and stuff like that. By the way, if you want to watch somebody who grabs all these live streams, check out Portland Andy on YouTube. He's a legendary multi-cam live streamer, right? So he just sits in his place, and he's kind of entertaining to watch as well. He does like stupid, crazy shit. Like he tears his t-shirts off. But Portland Andy is your guy for multiple live streams. All right. I think that's it. We got all Chicago'd out. And for all you people that live in Chicago or have family that live there, I hope that you have a very safe and unharmed period here over the next 72 hours. I do hope reason prevails, and that any kind of conflict or damage is limited, if it is going to happen, to a specific area, and that innocent people are not at all harmed or injured during any so-called demonstration. Because at the end of the day, we're all still Americans and we're humans. So I wish no harm on anyone. And it's about to get hot up in there. So kick back, check it out, and take in the next 72 hours of a great American spectacle at the end, in some ways, at the end of America's story, as it hits like the final end of the cycle of the fourth turning. That's where we are. And this convention in Chicago seems to be some kind of weird funnel point for all of it, especially looking back on the birth of Chicago, the Chicago chart, the 1893 exposition, and the 68 convention. They're all really intense charts. And it all seems to funnel right into tomorrow night. All right, take good care, everyone. Love you all. Treat each other well. Mods, thank you for your help, as always. Chataria, you're the best. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to discern what's possible. Have a good night, and bye for now.